hope has the highest correlation across all subdimensions. So now in some rooms at school, that was a pain in the ass and not helpful. In other rooms, it's one of the most valuable assets. What am I being hopeful for? That I'm going to turn up for this podcast? Well, I'm hopeful for that because I'm clear about it. I know what the date is, what the time is. I have pathways in terms of strategy to deal with that. Maybe I need to persevere.
So Ross, welcome to the Shift Show. I can't tell you how delighted I am to have you here.
You got to say your title carefully, haven't you? You got to say your title carefully. It's great to be here, Rachel.
Well, and I will tell you, the pun is intended because often, we are unpacking change, and often that's what it feels like.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, I can't wait to just kind of unpack your story. What I would really just like to start with is you, right? Who you are as a human and outside of work. And then I'd love to just kind of dive into your origin story and how you became an expert on adaptability.
Well, it's interesting. I suppose that story would depend who you asked, right? Of that. And I think like many of us, we have several origin stories, the origin story that we see of ourselves. And then if we try to play the observer, what other people might see along it. So I think for me, I've always been an entrepreneur, been fascinated by entrepreneurship and surrounded myself with circles of other entrepreneurs that are figuring it out as we go along. So my first aspect actually of who I am is someone who doesn't take the answer as a straight up answer. Now, in some rooms at school, that was a pain in the ass and not helpful. In other rooms, it's one of the most valuable assets. So my first sort of version of me, the first sort of chapter was as a designer, worked in a number of agencies, in publishing companies, and then in the late 90s, I started my first business, which was a brand and marketing agency. And for me, that was my main education. I'm blessed outside of work with a family. My wife and I have been together 20 years. We have a lifestyle in a very rural village. About 300 people live in our village.
Nice.
We have a vegan lifestyle. Karen, when we met, had 2 grown-up sons, and I'm blessed with 7 grandchildren. So me outside of work, I've been Granddad Ross for 19 years. So the eldest grandson is 19.
That's awesome.
Which is a story I love to tell because it kind of is a bit counterintuitive to people, even though I have grown the beard new for 2025. So I'll take a pause there on a few elements of me that people will pick up on, the type of values and character of how do I help and serve people in different ways. That entrepreneurial journey of the agency had an eclectic mix of clients and industries that led me into innovation, into change, that then I'm sure we'll get onto it, the origin of adaptability and AQ that came later.
You learn a lot of leadership lessons running a company like that, especially, that size as well. It's a competitive landscape too. I know that we will also get a question. The LinkedIn crew had asked about the next generation and how do we cultivate learning with that. I'm interested though, in terms of just you, Ross, the human, did your parents cultivate any of that? Were you born with this entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah, so both my parents in parts of their career were teachers. So originally, my father was an engineer at Rolls-Royce at the jet engines in Derby in sort of middle north England. And they moved down in the 70s to Bournemouth on the south coast where I was born. My brother was born in Derby. And they moved down for a different lifestyle. They then became hoteliers and restaurant owners. And so I grew up in an environment where my folks worked bloody hard. And if I wanted anything, I had to work for it. So if I wanted to buy, I had to work to save up, and we never bought anything we couldn't buy. There wasn't credit. It was you work hard enough to do those things. And so I think they certainly instilled an element of following what matters to me, design and art and those sorts of things, and a career in those areas 30 years ago, different kind of thinking when academically I was fairly strong, in science, very strong, but it didn't interest me at that time. So they were very supportive of that. In the middle, I think the power of who you know and the relationships came true through my father doing a round the world yacht race. So in 96, 97,
Interesting.
It was one where they spent 3 years training and fundraising for it because it had to, pay to go and take part on this crazy
Sailing is a
adventure.
very expensive hobby.
Yeah, crazy adventure to go around the world in this race that went what they call the wrong way round. So against the winds, against the currents.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as a family would, be doing quiz nights, all sorts of things to try and raise funds to do that. So again, a very entrepreneurial approach to it.
Well, I believe that. But it's so interesting to kind of hear that, and I think about like the framework that you have in the AQ assessment. And I mean, there's definitely lessons of grit and perseverance and all of those sorts of things kind of through that for sure. So if we go into like, Ross as his agency, and you're starting to learn now more about this adaptability lens, how did this become another company?
All right, so I'll share a couple of the key moments that led to this. So we won a contract to do the global rebranding for the United Nations volunteers. And for context, the majority of our clients and business came from referrals. Do a good job for them, and they tell someone else. Do a good job for them, they keep you coming back. When they move their role every 3 years and go to another company, they keep you and take you with you, and you try and retain the current clients. We had a lot of decent corporate clients. We had Sony Professional for the entire 17 and a half years before I sold it, Thomson Reuters, variety of, but we'd never gone for tenders and bids. And so when this one came up for this UN project, we thought that'll get the paperwork in order. It can't be more complex or more rigorous or more bureaucratic than doing a tender bid for the UN. So we thought that'll get it in order, and then we'll go for stuff that we can win. Anyway, we won it. And after the shift moment of winning it, it changed my perspective about my life.
Interesting.
In terms of where do I deploy my time, effort, and resources? And it was around the transition of the UN's global goals and the sustainable development goals. So we were shifting from the millennium goals to the SDGs as we know it now. Some people might know it as this little icon of 17 little colors, or the 17 squares of colors. I was invited to speak on the brand strategy of those global goals to the whole UN system, to the chiefs of marketing from all of the UN system. And it was kind of a moment in time that when you look back, you can connect those dots of what certain things happened that led you to now. So I was the brand strategy guy doing this that felt, okay, I'm now doing things that are meaningful and worthwhile. And this is a great to-do list. How can I work on making an impact for it? We then started to do more work inside innovation, particularly aimed at the sustainable development goals in large companies.
Okay, interesting.
And it was kind of a Venn diagram of using that as the problem, the SDGs, using innovation as the methodology for it, particularly Horizon 3, so edge innovation. And our thesis was, how do we use exponential technologies, quantum computing, AI, robotics, 3D printing, all of these things to solve those global goals? And what I held up here, Moonshot Innovation, was my first book, which was basically that. How do we, impact 1 billion people? So we've got to-do list here, these exponential technologies, having gone to Singularity University, drink from the Kool-Aid of Peter Diamandis and X Prize and all of those good things to do it. So we were going into Vodafone, Unilever, or, some big organizations to go, hey, we've got some great methodologies around driving innovation, speeding it up, doing it at the edge. We've got a wicked understanding of some of these new things that are coming along. Let's crack on. And what we soon realized, it wasn't a technological problem, it was a human problem. An inability for those humans to unlearn, to stop doing what they're currently doing, the core business versus exploring what's next and those edges. I'm a fan of psychometric assessments, had used them a lot, had launched a few into the European market from US owners of assessments and psychometrics and things. And I thought there's got to be something that is there. And that's what led the beginnings of AQ putting together a framework, putting together a model to really understand how, why, and when people adapt to change.
This is so unique in the market. I completely agree. I mean, it's what really alerted me to, meeting Scott and being like, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I love that. So it wasn't this really kind of one moment of the aha, but the journey that really led you there. It's really interesting. And the fundamental problem what I'm hearing is you got to was, how do I get the right people in the room? That's the problem you were trying to solve. Yeah.
Job to be done. A passion of driving innovation, a passion of these sustainable development goals, a passion of exponential technologies, and the human mess that is the beauty and the curse of progress. And so that was the initial driver. Then, of course, you begin to go into Alice's Wonderland, down the rabbit hole, and you uncover this challenge of the double diamond, where you diverge and converge as you go through discovery to, wow, this is so vast. How do I distill it to something that makes sense? So we've done that. Oh, it's so vast again. It applies to the whole employee life cycle. We can solve all sorts of things to then, okay, where do we converge again for the first beach landing of an entrepreneurial business? Sold the agency, raised some funds, put some money and energy into the scientific rigor and research with universities, with HR leaders, put a year together to pull out a robust framework that was scientifically validated. I'm proud to say we've now got a patent around AQ, the measurement of, when we launched the first beta in 2019, doing it via a conversational AI as the methodology for that data extraction was pretty unique. It was part of our initial vision of where is the puck going and where do we want to intercept it in terms of technological advances and the human societal need for rapid adaptation as we are shifting from this linear world to an exponential world, from a world where it was productivity and efficiency and management to a world where it's imagination, experimentation, and coaching. And that imagination economy that I was writing about and researching requires AQ as the fundamental skill to prepare us for what's coming. And what's coming, whether it's known or unknown.
So then talk us through now the framework of this. So you have really kind of three big, use the term pillars, but ability, character, and environment. And I will say there's a couple I would love to double click on with it, but just kind of setting that kind of high level
overview.
Yeah.
Well, the first part, I mentioned my sort of ease within science. Science came very easy to me at school. I love to learn. I consume learning, consume content. I've just done a book that's really deep on quantum mechanics. Yeah, I love that whole aspect.
Yeah.
And so the model that we fondly call the adaptiotic table, which is a nod to the periodic table, is set, as you say, in these three pillars. And it's easy to understand because it has a nice acronym of ACE: ability, character, and environment. So the ability is, how and to what degree do I adapt? So there's 5 subdimensions in each of these. So you'll see things like grit, mental flexibility, mindset, resilience, and unlearning. Now, each of these are distinct, they're measurable, And just because they're measurable, that doesn't qualify it enough to be in there. It has to link to a business outcome at work. So whilst adaptability applies to relationships, to school, to sports, to everything, our core thesis that we started off to validate this was in work for employees to link to a business outcome. So those 5 core abilities, think of them as muscles that are trainable and improvable. So yes, your mindset is a skill. It's learnable, it's trainable, it's developable. Bit like you are what you eat, your brain is what you feed it. So intentionally looking at what is that mindset of what am I feeding it that will then influence how and to what degree do I adapt. So that's that first component of the ACE model. Second is character. We specifically titled it character. Not only is it a great acronym of ACE, but also we wanted to create some distance from personality. Now, there's a huge legacy of psychometrics in the domain of personality profiles, DISCs, Myers-Briggs, Bellman, all of these sorts of ones. And arguments historically of you can't change them, they're fundamental. Let's label somebody and that's it. You are an EFPJ, you're a blue, you're this. And that, for us, fundamentally boxed people, labeled people, and created an inability for change and adaptation. Latterly, science has shown that personality isn't permanent. We can change it. We can influence it. Dr. Benjamin Hardy wrote a great book called Personality Isn't Permanent, good friend of mine. So we chose character, and this is who adapts and why. And so the first 2 that we have on there, emotional range and extroversion, are lent from the Big 5. So the Big 5 being one of the most robust, scientifically validated assessments. Emotional ranges are language for neuroticism. And we've got a few twists on there, and extroversion. What we're not saying is extroverted or introverted, adapt or don't adapt. We just need to know who, so that we can then trigger communication, support, and things around each of these.
Your preferred style.
Exactly. The final 3 in there is hope. Yes, there is a science of hope. We measure it using the adult hope scale. We train, and you can improve it even though it's in part of the character. And then motivation style and thinking style. So motivation style, not, oh, I'm motivated by mastery or money or star or relationships, but more around regulatory focus theory. So we can go more into that in time. And then the final one, which I think has been our secret weapon that we didn't realize was a weapon when we created it, is the environment. So many of these other assessments look at the singularity and individuality of a person and not the collective of where does that person live, operate, behave, and become influenced by in their environment. Your work environment, does it support rapid experimentation? The processes and systems of adaptation, and then work stress, importantly, as you know, having high work stress can be a great trigger for adaptation, right? That you want to fix that.
Yeah.
And then we have a few other parts, which are some predictive indexes. Depending on how deep, again, to the next layer, we have change readiness, we have reskill index, we have also behavioral aspects that we measure. We measure things like explore and transform, utilize and improve, other dimensions. And one we've never released any data on, but we've got 6 years of data on that we've been collecting, is one around uncertainty. So change uncertainty is a dimension we've been measuring.
Is the ACE model itself, are one of those more statistically significant to someone's change readiness or changeability?
Yeah, so just for ease of understanding, those 15 subdimensions that sit inside those 3 pillars are distinct independent measures. So we might, in language, in articles, confuse things like grit and resilience. We might use them in sort of similar kind of ways a little bit. These are fundamentally distinct constructs, aspects, and measurements. Now, those 2 indexes are made up of those subdimensions in different weightings. So whilst our AQ has a score and a profile, so it scores out of 900, so there is a different weighting and matrix across those subdimensions. Equally, within change readiness and reskill index, they're made up of different components of those subdimensions. So from a statistical basis, by design, if we take change readiness, for example, we've got an element of a motivation style that is taken into account of change readiness. There's a weighting in the ability and character. So it's unlearning, mental flexibility. We look a little bit again at that play to protect for reskill index versus, play to win. We look at hope. Work stress is a negative factor to reskill index, and also grit. So those components, we don't share the recipe.
Is there one element that you think is more important than anything, or that it weighs into people's adaptability?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of ways of thinking of that. We can think of it through lived experience, through antidotes of observed behavior, or we can use things like correlation work. Correlation doesn't mean causation, but one of the most powerful subdimensions that positively correlates with all other subdimensions is hope. So correlation has a direction and a strength. So we can positively correlate, meaning if one goes up, the other one goes up. We can negatively correlate, which means if one goes up, the other one goes down. And the strength is the degree at which that happens. Hope has the highest correlation across all subdimensions. So it's a really fascinating one that when we understand the science behind it, we use Snyder's framework and model of pathways, agency, and vision and goal, which we may or may not get time to digest and go into a little bit. But that is a real powerful shift from, hope is not a strategy. I sit in hopelessness. I am unable to act. It then has emotional, all sorts of other things that both correlate and are probably causations around that. On the other side, when you have absolute clarity of what am I being hopeful for, that I'm going to turn up for this podcast. Well, I'm hopeful for that because I'm clear about it. I know what the date is, what the time is. I have pathways in terms of strategy to deal with that. So I've put it in my Google Calendar. I've put half an hour before to do preparation work. I've gone and made my cup of tea. I've got my strategy and pathways of how do I achieve good result of a great podcast? And do I have agency and motivation? Agency, do I control my own diary? Do I say yes or no to certain things? Am I able to articulate stuff? Yes, if you're giving me 5 hours, harder to do it in tighter time. So that means I'm very hopeful for something, because it's very clear. I have those elements of what we measure inside hope.
Because that can land so much where someone's just hopeful and positive or not. Yeah. And I think people get in a very fixed mindset about that.
It's interesting you use the word mindset, and that's something we work on, is to define the difference between hope and mindset. And even words like, well, what's the difference? Language is such a thin pipe to describe a lot of constructs sometimes. When you remove the senses, what do we truly know? It's like wine. If you serve it at the same temperature, most blindfolded can't tell the difference between white wine and red wine. People think they can, but take temperature out and sight out, and you can't taste the difference and discern the difference. So when we come back to hope, things like, faith. What does faith mean? Is that similar? Am I optimistic? Is that hopeful? Is that mindset? So if people are really interested in not only understanding, having a common language for themselves and their team, but also how do we leverage this to get the desired outcomes we want?
Learning, in particular in the corporate world is so focused on acquisition of skills. One of the things that was also really stood out for me was the concept of unlearning. I've been thinking about that since Unleash, of like the things that I'm still trying to unlearn, or behaviors that I was taught by my parents, right? And particularly as you think about like the new world of work and, this kind of digital transformation that is happening. Can you tell me a little more about the unlearning piece?
Yeah. And I think what was interesting for me when we first began some of the research and what dimensions matter, what would include, and some of the early versions, and I've got some of the early sketches around this as I was consuming dozens of books and speaking to scientists and things and psychologists was learning agility and the speed of acquisition of new and how important that was. And as you said, a lot of focus is on that, right? Continual professional development. We want to upskill. We want to, reskill, acquire new things. And for many people, the cup is already full. And it's full of something that doesn't allow that new skill to be its true essence.
That's
If we
interesting.
put that new skill that is let's say, a drop of red dye into my current set of skills that is a swimming pool of water, because I'm super experienced. I've got a massive portfolio of skills and experience that I've got. So there's loads of stuff, loads of components of water in there. And I put that little new skill that's incredibly potent. It's really good. It gets diluted. And so I can acquire so many more of these. Hey, I've now got a green dye drop. I've now got a this drop. And really, it doesn't make any difference to that individual's ability to behave differently, think differently, act differently, and get a different result at the other end. So what we need to do, and what we discovered, is often reassess, my swimming pool, I now need to make it a bath, or I need to make it a cup, or I need to make it a certain way because my environment's changed. I'm now going on a plane and I can't take my swimming pool with me because it doesn't fit. So, and I can only take 100 mil because that's what airports tell me I can take. So I have to decide which 100 mil do I take on that airport, on the plane to go to the new piece. So I have to shed certain things to acquire it. So unlearning, unlike my folks said, oh, that's easy. You just get older, you forget, right? And I said, no, it's the intentional decision to let go of something that's no longer serving us. And that is through the data. And it's hard when it still gives us a little bit of an applause. So if we still get a bit of an applause from it, maybe I need to persevere. I still got a sale from doing X. I can only deliver coaching in person because that's when I get an applause. I can only have that meeting when I see somebody physically in the same space because I understand their frequency and I can, read all of the underpinnings that I do subconsciously well in a Zoom room. Bloody hard to do. How do I do those things? So unlearning as its concept, I then hung out with Barry O'Reilly, who wrote the book called Unlearn. How will we measure it? What really is it? What value does it provide? And then it has unlocked an entire journey of how letting go of past success to achieve new breakthroughs is an incredibly powerful skill. Letting go of past success, which might be an identity, a job role. What am I? How do I let go of those things intentionally to allow me for a new version of me? I'm the brand guy. I had to unlearn being the brand guy, myself, my peers, my relationships, to becoming the AQ guy, or whatever it may be that we have. This process, I use email. Now I just use AI tool to do this. Each of those things requires an unlearning and a specific intentional let go of something that's been before to release what is new as a breakthrough. So it's one of my favorite subdimensions, unlearning.
I completely agree. Are there methodologies or tips and tricks to unlearning? And I particularly think about things that we're taught by our parents, right? Or, women particularly hold on to societal norms and aspects, right?
I think there's an important part to just set ourselves some context around adaptability isn't always changing everything. It's also knowing, what do I not want to change? What remains stable for me? That is part of adaptability. What's no longer meeting my expectations? What's no longer serving me of the result that I want? And it could either be the burning platform or the burning ambition. So if it's no longer serving me of a burning platform, we haven't hit sales target. This isn't happening. Our whole business model has just been eaten because Google's launched X. And therefore, we raised 600 million. We had this whole proposition, and now it's being done by a component for free inside one of Google's AI suite, for example. So how do we go from this situation of why am I unlearning it? why am I changing something? And how close is it to a core value versus a behavior versus a process versus something else? So my advice is get the low reps in and low practice in areas where it's easier. So the unlearning for some, I don't need to. I'm only ever going to stay on my mountain with me. And therefore, I don't need to unlearn the fact that I need to wash, for example, because nobody's around me, and me being smelly doesn't stop me having the relationship with myself that I want.
Well, and there's a momentum in that, right? And like back to your point about if you're still getting reward, or maybe in some ways it's a lack of discomfort, right? I'm comfortable there.
Yeah. And often that is the case that, oh, change is hard. It requires effort, requires, work, requires energy in that component and base physics, to do something. Doing nothing also requires energy, also requires resources. And so again, it's a choice of those things. So I think, a lot of these subjects, we can get very excited about them. So unlearning, it's incredibly powerful and valuable. It needs to be set personally, team, organizationally, and industry. What do we want to not change or do change? There might be industry-led practices, i.e., that regulations control or don't control, that stifle innovation, don't stifle innovation, healthcare, aviation, a lot of these things. It could be an industry about finance and what is the, reserve currency, cryptocurrency, blockchain. All of these transitions of values and beliefs require unlearning, and we collapse when we no longer do that. If you look at any society throughout history, the Mayans, the Romans, all sorts of these, the collapse was due to an inability to adapt to the new reality. They had a relationship with what was and not an ability to create a place for them where they saw power, value, contribution, love, whatever it may be in there. And we're at a critical moment in work where the redesigning of the operating system, it's a perfect storm of many things happening. A polarization of society, from politics to geopolitics to conflict to all sorts of things, together with technology that's underpinning massive shift and change. And these choices that we're making now will fundamentally rewrite how we show up as a society. And in my lifetime, I am absolutely confident we will give birth to a new human species, a human species that is connected, not in a way of an external device like a phone, but one that is integral part of us. In the same way we might have a hip replacement with some titanium or various things, we will have a brain chip. It's happening. We know it's happening. The next phase of these things that will give us a connection, not through ChatGPT, doing a road trip in my RV after Unleash and I'm visiting Zion and Grand Canyon. Can you give me the best routes to go and most efficient places to top up the gas so it's super cheap? How we embrace these technologies changes our experience. And there are those that are digging our heels in because we are so wedded to the value of what got us here and not able to see that that's the exact barrier that will get us there. Marshall Goldsmith's great book. What got us here won't get us there.
Yeah, but absolutely, right? But there's a real fear in that. And that's one thing I've really been thinking about too, right? I mean, it's the same way they had fear of the tractor or others, right? Back in the industrial age, is how do we, as a, for lack of a better word, a team, a species, start to embrace that in new and different ways? I mean, I think your model is certainly a really interesting.
Yeah, it's a one component in the mix, right? Of all sorts of things that, okay, we have this psychometric, we have measuring, we have coaching, we have training, and who knows what will happen as we evolve through augmented reality, AI coaches, in the mix. There's strong evidence that language was birthed through mushrooms, and
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Evolution and a awakening of plant medicines going on now, a rebirth and a re-experimentation to bring that into corporate worlds, that no longer is, let's go to a training room in a hotel and do these things.
Yeah.
How many corporate retreats now will be under the aid of psilocybin, to unlock creativity or different areas, in the same way we might use a tool that was a pen and paper or a Post-it note or a Miro board to these other tools that we become aware of, and become more acceptable as we adapt through that process. And the difference between reaction, response, prediction, preparation, under our mental flexibility is to live in the paradox, live in the dualities, and to be at peace in duality of opposites without ending up in a padded cell. It's hard. But to your point, we are a species that does adapt and evolve. We are a species that is capable of this, and it will show up for us. And I think that, quantum energy will show up. Yeah. It absolutely will show up. The question is, are we tuned into that channel, or are we blind to it? And I think that's the help and work we do, is to give people the ability to see more channels rather than it's only BBC One and BBC Two, and the rest is snow on the screen until I turn the knob.
Let me jump to the audience interest questions, because I think in particular, I know they're going to love those. And we've hit, to be honest, on almost all of the ones that I've got. In your perspective, so this is from Claire on LinkedIn, how do we best prepare the next generation to deal with change and have adaptability as a core skill?
I think one of the things that we can do is allow them to help us rather than us help them. And, reverse mentoring, those sorts of things that we often think, my job is to prepare the next generation for it. I think the reverse might be true, in that generation's job is to help us bloody prepare better for it, so that we're not the blockers. So that's one thing that's floating around in my mind. The other part is, curiosity, embracing the inner child to play and experiment. And so going back to science, experimentation requires a hypothesis. It requires a distance between the relationship of the outcome. So you have a hypothesis, but you're not trying to load this to show what you always wanted it to result in. So removing that desire that the result has to be something, and we get rewarded on the result rather than rewarded on good experimentation process and methods. And we've got a massive disconnect taking organizations of the applause, check at the end of the month, the promotions on the result. Therefore, we're not setting up experimentation, imagination to achieve, failure's good, it's learning. Well, we need to connect the reward to that. So how do we prepare our younger generation to them? Is reward for the experimentation, reward in the discovery, reward in the curiosity to build that, try things on. I was rewarded for grit, and there still is great in that, but knowing when to quit. What is the difference between a cul-de-sac and a dip in something? Quitting smoking, good. Quitting your piano lessons that you started, no, you've got to keep going to it till you get good, or you really realize it's there. So I think it's being able to listen, letting them help us, and encouraging that experimentation, and to embrace the result that shows up, not the result that we're trying to prove because society values that, or we might have valued that yesterday.
Is that the same advice you would give to, say, a leader who was trying to build that in their AQ and their team?
Yes and no. To an AQ leader and team, I think it's very different, because their context is baggage of success is probably bigger. So the gap to get to that what we've had from experience is harder because they've been rewarded so many times for knowing the answer, having experience, and getting a predictable result. So you've got more unlearning to do with a leader than perhaps, some of my grandchildren that are still in that,
Fair. Yeah.
try on different things, and be comfortable with trying it on, and give that environment where it's safe to open up truly transparently in what's going on. And that is one of the hardest things for leaders to do, because they might have been labeled in the past. We say, put you under this pressure, now problem solve, now do this. We're cognitively impaired. We've had stressful situations, bad call, bad things. So leaders have got scars that we need to deal with biologically as well as psychologically before we can then do some of the stuff I mentioned.
So interesting.
Before.
Yeah.
Essence of a hopeful minute or two an answer.
That was really good. How do you differentiate, then this is from Michael, the difference between true adaptability and just sort of reactiveness? And he used the term reactive overcorrection.
Yeah. I don't think that I would differentiate them. I'd say it's a component of, i.e., there's a differentiation between A and B, but they're both letters in the English alphabet, right? So reacting, responding, collective, preparing, all of those things are, in my world, adaptability is the language framework, and those other things that were described are components of it. There is a time when reacting at speed is super valuable, and that is a part of adaptability, right? It could be, for example, we have a protocol, fire's happening, we know the drill, and we follow the lights, and we do those things, and you need to do it quickly. It might not be, okay, let's do some collective work here. The fire's there. Let's have a brainstorming session. Let's look at some alternative routes. Let's do an experiment. Let's get 5 people to go out the window, 4 people to go here, this to go there when it's happening.
Yeah.
Oh, the car in front's I've seen the red lights go on. Well, okay, so I could put my hands out the window. Maybe that'll slow us down. I could put my foot on the brake a little bit. Maybe I could use the handbrake. Maybe I could turn left, turn right, avoid them. Let's have a few, bang. There is situations where absolutely responding in the moment is helpful.
Yeah.
Even sometimes when it's a shadow version of ourselves, right? When we swear, when we lose our temper, when we do those things. The fallibility of humans in those moments, that might have been exactly what you needed to adapt to be more collected next time, right? And really understand, I've now damaged that relationship because I wagged my finger. They're the clues, they're the triggers that what we need to go through, what I call is the 4 R's of transformation. So setbacks to springboards. It's recognize, reflect, reimagine, and respond.
Wow.
And so super quickly that recognize, so acknowledge what it was, that adaptation requirement, that change requirement. Do it as an observer. So I'm a failure versus I'm an observer of failure. Okay. I haven't labeled myself as that. So I can recognize it, I acknowledge it, then I reflect. So this is where we do some work around what was the event, maybe what led up to it, various different protocols, 5 whys, those sorts of things. Take ownership over that, over my mental health, over, reset my mindset. That always happens. Every time I meet that person, they piss me off. Every time I go to an airport, I become the sarcastic, not nice version of Ross. For a year, I've been working very hard on not being associated in the trigger of, cues, disrespect, impatience, triggering a version of me. It's none of those things. It's me. So I have to recognize, I have to reflect, I have to sit away from those before I can reimagine with intention of what, looking forwards, not backwards, always happens. How might I act next? What are the new ideas that show up to me? Because those things I've observed, and it pisses my wife off. And maybe the person behind me in the queue feels uncomfortable, and I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable. And maybe I didn't get on the flight I was supposed to get on, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
That, okay, something's not working. What are my new goals? What are my new strategies of those things? And just quickly on that, I have managed to rewire those neural networks, that those triggers don't exist anymore. Rather than suppression techniques or breathing, try and avoid, try and do these things, try and, see the other perspective. I was at a situation very challenging in an airport where normally the shadow version of Ross would have come and said, hello. He wasn't even inside. I wasn't even suppressing him.
Well, congratulations.
I have rewired that over, that is daily meditative practice that has removed him from my DNA.
That's amazing.
From who I am. So that reimagining allows me to deliberately respond to those new opportunities. And it's helped me, stop, pause, consider, and have a new vision of how I now respond. So that, collected versus response, those 4 R's, I did digress, but awesome. I thought it was relevant.
Absolutely.
Very specifically to that question.
Very, very relevant. I'm going to do one more question, but final from LinkedIn. How do you balance adaptability without losing your core direction or values?
Define your non-negotiables. And those non-negotiables are non-negotiables today. Revisit them. So in order to do that, my non-negotiables are X, Y, and Z, i.e. these are my values. These are my beliefs. I've done that with my wife. We've gone to coaching sessions as couples, Strategic Coach and Dan Sullivan, I've been a member of for a long time, and they do a couples connection piece. We set our, prime objectives, our non-negotiables as a couple. How are you doing that for you as yourself, for you with your core relationships at work? Where are those? What are our non-negotiables and expectations with my colleague, with my co-founder, with my peer, with my other leaders? Do we know what they are? When they're clear, those are what we're not adapting until we decide to. Until we pop over the fence and see, educating women's good. Or, doing this is good. Whatever it may be that was core, that I would never change, that I now change. So the permission to say, I stick to this, but each time I come across a decision, that quick filter, that's easy. I say no to those things. I say no to those things. I say no to those things. And then I might reflect, because I'm not achieving what I want to achieve. The results are no longer showing up, or maybe they're diminishing slightly. What do I need to reevaluate of my values? So know them, stick with them, give them for some period. And some people, it lives through generation, family generation, not just lifetime of what those non-negotiables are. And that works beautifully. You know where you stand on those things.
Yeah. There's real element of self-awareness in that too. So I'm listening to the show right now, and I'm super energized about going out to be more adaptable. What is the first thing I should do after I click subscribe?
I think in my book, I took my own take on Maslow's hierarchy of needs from an adaptability perspective. And the first base of that is harness those 3 forces. So if we understand our ability, our character, and environment, that is the fundamental piece to understand. Know my ability, know my character, know my environment. So if they're curious about this, i.e. they're still living, they should be curious about it, right? Because to live is to adapt, choosing what we say yes, what we say no to, on the 40,000 decisions we make a day.
Was it this one, the 3 steps?
No, it's called
there's a triangle. Yeah, I think I saw that one too.
So get that stage first. Understand where we are, get that measurement. From there, you can make decisions. Is it relevant or not? That's probably, that's the one.
Okay.
Having high grit may or may not be relevant for you. It's like height. If I know how high I am, I can make certain decisions around what sports I play, what I do, all of those sorts of aspects and things, where I live. So that is the fundamental first step. Go and do that. Get it. We've got lots of ways you might be able to find access into it. You can buy singular assessments on our site, but then we have a huge network of certified professionals that if it's something you want to do with your teams and things, we can connect you in for what's the problem you're solving. This isn't suffering from toolitis. I've just bought this new tool. Where do I use it? Now, let's start with the context and the problem we're solving first, and then look at how do we deploy some of those data insights for better decisions that we can then, really start to build on our adaptability to serve us as an intelligent skill.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And I'm going to also just say I have so much reading and work out of this. I've learned a ton. You have also just taken something that was just completely abstract, right? This adaptability, and you have made it real and practical and hopeful for me and how, we're learning and growing through this. This has just been an amazing conversation.